Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. The White House says it won't comply with the Democrats' impeachment inquiry in a newly released letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. In the 8-page document addressed to the House Speaker and 3 Democratic committee chairmen, the Trump administration calls the probe illegitimate and constitutionally invalid. But Pelosi has insisted the House is well within its constitutional right to conduct oversight of the executive branch. That letter comes the same day the White House moved to block a key witness in the Democrats' impeachment inquiry. Gordon Sondland, the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, was set to appear on Capitol Hill Tuesday, but did not show up on orders of the White House. Last week, text messages revealed Sondland was a key figure in the administration's efforts to pressure Ukraine into investigating former Vice President Joe Biden. Democrats are eager to ask Sondland about the decision to withhold military aid to Ukraine. Last month, William Taylor, a top U.S. official in Ukraine at the time, raised the issue to Sondland via text. He wrote, "I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign." Sondland then reportedly called the president before responding with this text. "Bill, I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear, no quid pro quos of any kind." He went on to write later, "I suggest we stop the back and forth by text." House Democrats are now vowing to issue a subpoena for Sondland's testimony and documents. Their efforts seem to be resonating with the majority of the public. A new poll finds that 58% of Americans support an inquiry into the president. Right now, we are joined by White House correspondent and associate editor at Politico, Anita Kumar. On Capitol Hill is Siobhan Hughes. She covers Congress for the Wall Street Journal. And here with us on set is Rebecca Roiphe. She is a CBSN legal contributor and former assistant district attorney. Welcome to all of you. Anita, I'd like to begin with you. What information might Gordon Sondland have that is of such interest to House Democrats?
I think you kind of summarize it very well, because this is a key witness here. House Democrats feel that he can not only talk about what was offered or what was asked of Ukraine, rather, what was asked of them, but whether there was a quid pro quo, whether the president was saying to the country, we won't give you aid unless you act on this investigation. Not only would he know what the president was thinking, but other key aides in the White House and the State Department, and exactly what the administration was looking for. They're also interested to know, though, if someone was blocking this information from getting over to the House Democrats. Clearly, today, the administration is saying he can't testify, so there is some of that blocking, but there's some interest in learning whether that quid pro quo, if it was there, was hidden, and who knew about it. As you indicated in those text messages, it looks like they didn't want to write things down and wanted to talk about this on the phone. So there's going to be a lot of questions for him about that if he does get to testify.
Siobhan, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called the move to block Sondland's testimony Tuesday an abuse of power and explained the next steps. Let's listen to some of what she said.
There will be a subpoena, and we'll see if they respond. Article 3 of the Nixon impeachment was refusing to honor the subpoenas of Congress. I'm not here to say what those articles will be, or if there will be articles. We're having an inquiry. We'll see where it takes us. If it takes us to that place, at that time, a determination will be made as to what they are. But we're not prejudging it.
All right, a bit difficult to hear there, Siobhan, but she said, let's see where it takes us, speaking of this inquiry. So do Democrats, Siobhan, have a plan in place to get the White House to cooperate?
So there's really very little the Democrats can do to get the White House to cooperate if they don't want to. But Democrats do have a big threat. And that's what you heard Nancy Pelosi refer to just there, which is the allegation that the White House is obstructing Congress. She was pointing out that that was one of the articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon that could form the basis for impeachment. And last week, Adam Schiff basically said that at some point decisions were going to have to be made if the stonewalling continued.
So, Rebecca, let me get your legal analysis then. Based on that sort of framing, how do you see this shaping up to be a legal fight in court?
Right. Well, there are 3 options for Congress now. Obviously, at first they'll issue the subpoena, but if the White House continues to insist that he not testify, then there are three legal options. One is to refer this matter to the Department of Justice. That's usually not very fruitful because the Department of Justice is within the executive and may just choose not to investigate it. The second is this little used power that Congress has, which is to hold somebody in contempt. They can actually put somebody in jail. It's been really is not, seems to me, last resort, and hopefully they will choose not to use that. The most common effort would be to go to court and try to get an order saying that Sondland has to comply with this subpoena, and that will then be litigated, and it can be put on a fairly fast track. That's what happened in the Nixon case. So it could be resolved in a matter of months, not years.
So, Rebecca, in a tweet, the president wrote, quote, "I would love to send Ambassador Sondland to testify, but unfortunately he would be testifying before a totally compromised kangaroo court," he wrote, "where Republicans' rights have been taken away and true facts are not allowed out for the public." Could this tweet in any way undermine the White House's legal challenges when it comes to complying with this impeachment inquiry?
Yes, I mean, I think that it adds to Nancy Pelosi's warning and argument that at some point this begins to look like obstruction of Congress. This is part of a pattern that the president has of treating all mechanisms of accountability as purely partisan efforts to undermine him and his presidency. And while there are ways in which this rhetoric works repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly, at a certain point, Congress can say, you know, we consider this an actual obstruction of our inquiry. Now, of course, then it goes to the Senate, and we'll see what the Senate says, but it is a possibility.
All right, so as we've been speaking here, we've just learned that that White House letter that we mentioned has in fact been released. It is addressed to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi as well as the heads of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the House Intel Committee, and the House Oversight Committee. And I'll just take a moment to read some of it, literally kind of processing this in real time here. But part of what this letter says, addressed again to those leaders that I just mentioned, those lawmakers, is that with respect to the proceedings so far, that this shows a, quote, defiance of our founders. I'm sorry, this is the wrong letter. Let me go ahead and pull up the correct one. Bear with us, folks. This is live. So here we have the letter that I just mentioned. It says, "You have denied the president the right to cross-examine witnesses, to call witnesses, to receive transcripts of testimony, to have access to evidence, to have counsel present, and many other basic rights guaranteed to all Americans. You have conducted your proceedings in secret. You have violated civil liberties and the separation of powers by threatening executive branch officials, claiming that you will seek to punish those who exercise fundamental constitutional rights and prerogatives. All of this violates the Constitution, the rule of law, and every past precedent. Never before in our history has the House of Representatives, under the control of either political party, taken the American people down the dangerous path you seem determined to pursue. Put simply, you seek to overturn the results of the 2016 election and deprive the American people of the president they have freely chosen." All right, a lot to unpack there, and I want to start with you, Rebecca, because as you are getting the chance to digest this here as well, what is your sense of the strategy on the part of the White House here in framing the resistance to the impeachment inquiry subpoenas, as we just talked about, this legal battle that could be shaping up here?
Right. Well, I mean, so as a public relations matter, what they're doing is sort of hitting the ball back into the other side of the court, saying, no, it's not us who are acting in an unconstitutional way. It's not the executive. It's you guys. One thing that's really important to notice, though, as a legal matter, is that there are certain things, the rights that he is talking about are trial rights. The impeachment inquiry is not a trial. The impeachment inquiry is essentially the same as a grand jury investigation that would end in an indictment. So it is far more public. He's had access to far more information than a normal defendant would. A normal defendant may not even know that a grand jury has been convened.
Because these are secret proceedings, typically grand jury proceedings
he has no rights at this stage. I mean, it is more public because it's a political process rather than a prosecutorial process. But it is very important to realize that this is not a trial. So he will get his chance to
because that's what takes place in the Senate.
In the Senate.
Okay.
So he will have his chance to see the evidence, to confront witnesses against him, all the constitutional rights afforded defendants at a trial when the appropriate phase comes. So it's very important to make that distinction. Right now we're in an inquiry, which is entirely different.
Anita, I want to get your take on some of this. I know you're digesting this along with us here. What is your sense of what we've seen in this letter with respect to the president's framing of this issue here and the way in which he's pushing back against Democrats in their efforts to conduct this impeachment inquiry?
Well, that language was extremely strong, but we've been hearing that he was going to do this letter and wanted to outline that basically he's not going to cooperate. I mean, if we had any confusion about that, they pretty much set that straight today, both with the testimony that we had expected today and also this letter. We know going forward that this administration is not going to cooperate with subpoenas for testimony, for documents. That is not what they're going to do, and I think that the president wanted to just put that out there. He doesn't think it's a fair fight, as he's indicated in there, whether that's the case or not. And he wanted to sort of send a note, a letter, a message, really, to his supporters around the country that he is going to fight this, that he believes this is still about 2016, that, he's had 2 years of the Russia investigation. They failed to try to impeach him for that, and now here he is with facing this, Russia #2, facing this other investigation, and that he's going to fight back. And so I think it's a message, obviously, to Congress, but it's also a message to all of America that this is how he's going to approach this impeachment.
Siobhan, let me ask you, how is this letter likely to be received? One of the questions before this letter was actually released was whether or not the White House was going to insist that Nancy Pelosi hold a vote on whether to conduct an impeachment inquiry. I have to confess, have not had a chance to go through all the pages of this letter as we've just received it. But how is it you think that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and those heads of those various House committees are likely to respond to this?
Well, it's going to force a decision point for the House Democrats. Number one, Trump is hitting Democrats exactly where they live. A lot of Democrats themselves had reservations about pursuing impeachment because, as Trump says, it essentially overturns the will of the people in the 2016 elections. But if Mr. Trump maintains this posture, if you don't see a second whistleblower come forward, if the first whistleblower can't testify, Democrats are going to be forced to make a decision because, remember, they're aiming to wrap this up this year, and it's not a guarantee that a subpoena fight played out in court would be resolved in time to get this concluded.
So I'm just being told by our producers that at least our initial read of it does not seem to suggest there is a demand on the part of the White House here for a vote, that Nancy Pelosi hold a vote. So that would perhaps suggest what to you, Anita, that in fact that potential line of attack that we had been hearing about, that perhaps the White House was going to essentially call Nancy Pelosi to go ahead and put Democrats on the record, that doesn't appear to necessarily have been the case, that this letter doesn't call Nancy Pelosi to hold that vote.
Well, it's very interesting, not for the political reason you just mentioned, but because I've been hearing from the White House now for a couple weeks, White House and people close to the White House, that they were not planning on turning over any documents because they didn't feel they needed to do that until there was a vote. So I wonder if they're not putting that in there because there's, whether there's a vote or not, they don't plan on cooperating in any way at all. So, I mean, to me, it's showing that they do not plan on cooperating, whether there's a vote or not. The House could take them to court, and I think it'll probably be settled there.
So let's talk about the process here. Siobhan, CBS News has learned that House Democrats might conceal the identity of the original whistleblower whose complaint sparked this impeachment inquiry. What kinds of specific steps might they take?
Well, from the reporting, it could be things like having the whistleblower testify from a remote location, so not physically present in front of the lawmakers, masking this person's voice, masking this person's face. The threat being, of course, that the Republicans on that committee, many of them say that it's only appropriate Mr. Trump know the identity of his accuser. And, of course, the fear is that some of those allies of Mr. Trump would reveal his identity to the president.
Anita, in your most recent article, you spoke to half a dozen senior Republicans about the president's approach to this Ukraine controversy. What do they say is their biggest concern?
They're having a concern right now that the president is treating Ukraine pretty much the way he treated the Russia investigation. So with the Russia investigation, he, as you know, called it a hoax and a witch hunt and said there was just nothing there and he didn't do anything. And what they're saying to me is that they have some concerns about that strategy because this is a whole different issue. And the president, by his own admission, did make this phone call. He did ask for something to be done about Joe Biden and his son. So they're saying it's not the same thing, and you can't consider it the same thing. The president is kind of lumping these two things together, and they're not sure that that strategy is going to work. Because we know that he did make the call. He said he made the call, and so many different, so many different aspects. There's so many different aspects here, and they worry that he's not understanding the seriousness of the allegations. These are Republicans who support President Trump. They do not think he should be impeached, and they don't think this is an impeachable offense. But they do say that he made a mistake, that he was naive when he asked the president of Ukraine to investigate the Bidens, and so they are saying that it just may not work for him politically here as he gears up for his reelection campaign by just saying there's nothing here, because clearly there's something there. We know that by the president's own admission.
And based on the rhetoric that we've seen, some of it in this letter, Anita, what is the level of concern at the White House within the Trump campaign about this inquiry, and how is that affecting how it is that the White House manages the fallout?
I think there's more concern about the 2020 reelection than there is on impeachment. The president and people around him, I should say, feel pretty strongly that they will not have enough votes in the Senate, that not enough Senate Republicans would vote for impeachment if it gets to that point. So if the House acts, it obviously will go to the Senate, and they feel that even though they've had some criticism by some Senate Republicans, that there wouldn't be enough votes to impeach him. They are, however, concerned about the reelection campaign. I know that some Republicans are saying that this has energized the base and it has helped the Trump campaign raise money. Both of those things are true. But some of these people that I talked to said there's no way that this is a positive. Impeaching a president, or at least going through the inquiry, is not a positive thing for a president looking to get a second term.
Siobhan, over the last week, we have seen the narrative shift quite a bit from impeachment to the decision to withdraw those troops from northern Syria. How is it that Democrats in the House plan to keep any kind of momentum going when it comes to the impeachment probe, given what else, frankly, is happening in the world?
It's true that their attention is now going to be divided, but that said, it's very, very hard to see Democrats losing sight of the impeachment probe. Number one, the issues are consolidated in the hands of just 3 committees, so other people are free to focus on things like Syria. And in addition, there's just an incredible focus, an incredible drive to bring this to a conclusion one way or another.
All right, Rebecca Roiphe, Anita Kumar, and Siobhan Hughes, thank you all for sharing your insights with us.